Welcome to the final instalment of this set of 6 Year 11 GCSE English Language lockdown videos. If you're watching this one, my assumption is that you have watched the previous 5, in which we enjoyed reading chunks of Penelope Lively's Heatwave. We've been introduced to the likes of Pauline, a copywriter keen to ensure that colons and semicolons are used accurately. We've been introduced to her dizzingly-in-love daughter Teresa, grandson Luke, and maverick know-it-all son-in-law Maurice, who is going places in the world as a writer of entertaining yet superficially intellectual history books. Along with reading the text, you've been completing short activities aimed at making you better readers and writers, which have included work on boosting vocabulary, showing more complex emotions within individual paragraphs, and exploring the difference between appearance and reality. Anyway, for the final time in this series, let's get on with it and carry on honing skills for GCSE English Language. You're watching Schofield on Shakespeare. Lively ends chapter 1 of Heatwave by including an exchange between Pauline and Chaundy, a no-nonsense farmer who certainly does not romanticise his work or make any particular attempt to be gushing with acquaintances. Pauline knows this field intimately, its range of mood and colour, its seasonal changes. It is growing wheat, winter wheat, which at this May moment is a rich green pelt. It is a large field and will yield 60 tons of wheat at a reasonable harvest. So the emerald quilt which ripples silver in the wind represents around £5,000. Pauline has established these facts from Chaundy, the farmer from whom she bought World's End. Chaundy is not an overly friendly man, and their relationship is one of guarded acquaintance, no more. But from time to time they meet on the track and a desultory conversation takes place. On one of these occasions, Pauline solicited this information about the field. "Think you'd have taken up farming?" said Chaundy, sardonic. "Certainly not, but I look out at that field all the time. I thought I'd like to know more about it." Chaundy was not interested in Pauline's interest. He answered her queries grudgingly, in a throwaway manner. Acreage, yield. He is not interested in Pauline, come to that. She is simply someone with whom he once did business and who is now a neighbour, but in a peripheral way, since she is not of his community. He is not obliged to deal with her from day to day. She does not work for him, or sell him fertiliser, or buy his grain, or share his concerns. She does not inhabit his world, except in a literal sense. Chaundy is a big farmer, as they go. He has land here, and also over in the next valley. He runs a caravan site 10 miles away and a pick-it-yourself fruit farm on the other side of the hill, complete with farm shop and restaurant. He also has a large range of broiler chicken houses. Chaundy probably does not get his hands dirty very much these days. Mostly he drives from one to another of his concerns in a newish but battered Peugeot, issuing terse instructions. Quite a lot of people work for Chaundy, most of them for rather small amounts of money. Up at the top left-hand corner of the field, where its neighbour begins, there is a triangle of glaring yellow which tips away over the crown of the hill. Oilseed rape. Pauline is not entirely sure where she stands vis-a-vis oilseed rape. Aesthetic opinion is sharply divided over this issue. There are those who find it cheerful, a nice splash of colour. The purists, who are the most vociferous, deplore it as a discordant and jarring note amid the subtle tones of the English landscape. The stuff is decried as an intrusive blight from across the channel. EC agricultural policy has made rape a profitable cash crop, and it has therefore achieved sinister political overtones, as well as being a nasty colour. Pauline, looking over at that citron flag on the hillside, has mixed feelings. Sometimes it does indeed stroke a note of gaiety. She thinks of the warm south, of fields of sunflowers. At others it appears as an aggressive shout against the skyline. But in any case it will pass. By June it will be extinguished, in line with the ephemeral qualities of this landscape. Thus World's End on this May afternoon, which shades off now into evening, as Pauline tidies her desk, leaves her study and goes down that odd precipitate staircase to see what she has got in the fridge for supper. And thus also Pauline, Teresa, Maurice, mother, daughter, son-in-law and husband, neighbours, relatives, poised for this agreeable summer of industry and companionship. I want to start with a consideration of direct and indirect speech. My general advice for pupils taking exams or completing GCSE English Language assignments is that they should keep direct speech to an absolute minimum and possibly avoid altogether. There are a few reasons for this. Firstly, so many pupils make errors with the positioning of punctuation when it comes to speech marks. For example, missing out punctuation before the second speech mark, or being unclear whether a full stop or comma should go before or after the second speech mark. But secondly, a key principle of GCSE English Language is showing the examiner how good you are at English, how broad your vocabulary is, how you can use complex, interesting ideas seamlessly. It's tricky to do this within a realistic exchange, which tend by definition to be mundane and rather ordinary. Do you really want to waste words on inanities such as, "How are you? I'm fine, mate. Bit cold today, innit?" However, a small amount of direct speech can be effective and add variety to your writing. Hearing the exact words used by a character can potentially give additional insight or clues as to what they're really like. It's also worth pointing out that this is the only use of direct speech throughout Penelope Lively's Chapter 1, which is more than 2,500 words long. So, use direct speech sparingly. But what about indirect speech? What exactly is the difference? Indirect speech is when you report the gist of what someone has said without using their exact words and without using speech marks. Later on in Chapter 2, Lively uses more direct speech in this apparently innocuous exchange between Maurice, Teresa and Pauline. Maurice is standing now at the window, holding a cup of coffee. He turns, lowering his cup. "We might go somewhere on Sunday, if this weather holds. James and Carol are coming for the weekend. James wants to go over Chapter 6 again." "I'll do a big shop in Hadbury this morning," says Teresa. "Maybe we'll have a leg of lamb." Pauline stows her letter in her pocket. "Carol," she says. Maurice has picked up the newspaper now, is scanning the front page, abstracted. "She lives with James," Teresa tells her mother. Carol, "Oh, what is her other name, Maurice? Anyway, will they come on Friday or Saturday?" Lively has clearly made a conscious decision to include the exact words used by the characters. If she'd used indirect speech, the first part of the passage might have looked like this. Maurice is standing now at the window, holding a cup of coffee. He turns, lowering his cup, before suggesting that they could all go somewhere on Sunday. He added that James and Carol would be joining them for the weekend, partly so that James could go over Chapter 6 again. Teresa replied that she would do a big shop in Hadbury and suggested getting a leg of lamb. We'll come back in a moment to the effect of this change, but first let's return to the short snippet of speech from Chapter 1. Convert this to indirect speech before considering the effects of this change. Press pause to get cracking. This video will resume in 5 seconds' time. Your version might have looked something like this. Chaundy asked sardonically whether she was thinking of taking up farming. She replied that she wasn't, but pointed out that she spent plenty of time looking out at the fields, and so wanted to know more about it. The more interesting question here is, what is the effect of this change? Well, within my indirect speech version at least, you lose the abruptness of "certainly not," which confirms Pauline as a no-nonsense, independent woman who has no issues responding to sarcastic sallies from a member of the opposite sex. I also wonder whether the indirect speech pointed out that she spent plenty of time looking out at the field makes Pauline seem somehow more pedantic and finicky although perhaps this is due to my choice of verb pointed out more than anything else. The indirect speech version implies that she is hell-bent on explaining and justifying herself, whereas I wonder whether the direct speech focuses more on Pauline's placid absorption of nature. So these are subtle differences, but the best writers take account of these subtleties when crafting their pieces. And returning to the use of direct rather than indirect speech in Chapter 2, do we need the direct speech in particular to highlight the quizzicalness of Pauline's one-word carol? Does this help sow the seeds for later in the novel when she suspects Maurice of having an affair with this carol? I'd now like to consider the structure of the chapter as a whole. Here you can see the beginning of the chapter and the final paragraph. What similarities can you find between these two paragraphs? Press pause to jot these down in bullet points. And so clearly Lively has used a circular structure to help the chapter seem complete, which is something I recommend to my own pupils. Referencing the same details or details which have subtly changed from the first paragraph in the last paragraph can give the sense of completion, of coming back to an ending. And so the final task of this series of videos is a slightly longer one. Write the opening and closing paragraph for the question. Write about a time when you were exploring a particular place. This question happens to be taken from an OCR GCSE English Language Paper 2 question 6, but it could easily have come from any of the other GCSE or IGCSE exam boards. I'd imagine that if you completed the whole thing, you would write in the region of 7 paragraphs. But for now, just do the first and the final one. Off you go, make it interesting and atmospheric, and press pause. I write, it is early morning, and so Rua da Coxinha is uncharacteristically quiet. No eyes beading out above cheap faux surgical masks. No chugging old buses or impatient cars. No construction workers sweating in high-vis. No mini coffee sippers outside on tables. Just a reassuringly inaccurate neon-lit temperature sign adjacent to the pharmacy. Just the blackness of the night sky above. I walk purposefully down the hill, rucksack bouncing slightly with every step. It is late night now, and so Rua da Coxinha is uncharacteristically quiet. The polluting buses, the rushing drivers have completed their journeys for the day. A solitary mask lies discarded on the pavement outside the pharmacy, a smear of black dirt visible on its right-hand side. The night sky is black above. I walk up the hill, take out my keys, and slowly enter the apartment. Another day. How do I attempt to create atmosphere within these paragraphs? Well, the repetition of details, slightly altered, helps provide an air of completion. In both paragraph 1 and 7, I'm walking in the Rua da Coxinha, albeit in different directions and at different times of the day. Both paragraphs reference masks, but in the first paragraph the marks are conspicuous by their absence because people aren't awake yet. But in the second paragraph there is a dirty mask on the floor. And both paragraphs mention the pharmacy. The first paragraph talks about its unfailingly inaccurate temperature sign, whilst in the second paragraph the grubby single mask is outside its premises. Hopefully you will be able to glean that there has been a progression through the piece of writing, or at least a subtle change of mood. The optimism of adverbs such as reassuringly, purposefully, or the verb bouncing has been replaced by grime, the absence of the verb purposefully, and the grim, stark, short-sentence paragraph for effect, another day. I must also confess that I didn't take inspiration just from Penelope Lively for these paragraphs, but also randomly the lyrics to Flanders and Swan's haunting 1963 song Slow Train. Here's a short extract, which was ringing in my head when I wrote the lines. No eyes beading out above cheap faux surgical masks. No chugging old buses or impatient cars. No construction workers sweating in high vis. No mini coffee sippers outside on tables. And this is the point. Absorb all the language around you. Process it, possess it, think about it, and potentially use forms of it. The more you read language and think about it, the better your writing is going to be. And so that's it for this lockdown series. If you watched every minute and completed every task, the hope is that you are slightly better at writing about imagery. Slightly better when it comes to including more detail within your descriptive paragraphs. Slightly better when it comes to opening and concluding paragraphs. The hope is that you now know how to use colons and semicolons accurately, and that you are more likely to deliberately make choices when it comes to direct and indirect speech. Perhaps your personification will work slightly better and be less wooden. Perhaps your descriptive writing may be slightly subtler. But all of this is a long process. Remember, there are no quick fixes in English. I'd like to finish the series with an extract from that haunting Flanders and Swan song, Slow Train. This song talks of how things have changed, and not really for the better, and so fits perfectly within our COVID-infested world. Indeed, my own wife currently has COVID, although fortunately currently doesn't have any serious symptoms. Stay well, all of you, and many thanks for watching Schofield on Shakespeare. The sleepers sleep at Old No passenger waits on Cheatington platform or chairs.